players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Icefang Coatl, Uro Oko, and on occasion, white cards too. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy and the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is sponsored by Cardboard Live, BoshNRoll on YouTube, ThrabenU University, and theepicstorm.com.
Welcome to episode 22 of the Eternal Glory podcast. Choose your starter. I'm Phil Gallagher, joined by Brian Coval and Bryant Cook. How are you all doing today?
Doing well. How are you, Phil?
Doing pretty good. Definitely might have been up till 3 in the morning last night gaming because I couldn't sleep. But other than that, no complaints.
Is that weird? Like, I gotta be honest, like my normal... Like, I usually go to bed around 12:30 to 1:30, but, like, lights off, go to sleep is probably between 2:30 and 3 for me, and that's just baseline these days.
Well, under normal circumstances, I get up at 6:45 a.m. to, like, get to work on time and all that. But now I get up at about 8 in the morning because I start work at 8 in the morning, so...
Okay, I guess that's fair. Yeah, my alarm during normal work times is set for 5:15. Like, my workday starts at 7:30, like ass in seat. So I've been really enjoying not being awake that early, but I'm impressed that I guess you still have job responsibilities, so being awake at 8 is still something you have to do. But I don't, so like my normal sleep schedule these days is like 2:30 to 11.
So, I'm not one to, like, I tend to burn the candle at both ends. I stay up pretty late, or in my opinion, pretty late, like 1 a.m., and then I wake up at about 7 to go to work. Not as degenerate as you two, but I often moto pretty late. And then Sunday, or Saturday night, I decided to play the 3 a.m. Vintage Challenge. Whoa. And then stay up and do the Legacy Challenge at 11. It was pretty brutal.
So, like, imagine that's just your life. Like, Eco Baronins and like Guldakots of the world who like that is what they do. Like, no offense, I like those guys, I'm not trying to shit on them, but just like that lifestyle, just being a moto grinder where like you live and die by the 3 a.m. challenge schedule. Like, oh, that just I am both insanely jealous and extremely relieved that that's not my life at the same time.
So let me tell you how upset I was Sunday morning. I had started the 3 a.m. challenge 3-0, and it was only like 54 people, and I was like, I could probably 4-2 make this, and I lose my round 4 to a couple nut draws, lose my round 5 because I misplayed one game that crushed another, and I lose my round 6 because my opponent tinkers into Blightsteel, no hand. I have lethal on board, but they have a Spellbomb in play, the Nile Spellbomb, and so I top deck. I have to draw a spell in order to kill them with my Sprite Dragon. And my draw spell is Breach. So Breach is going to murder them, or my Sprite Dragon will murder them. So they crack Spellbomb, they exile my graveyard, and then hit Pyroblast to kill my Sprite Dragon. All in one fluid action. And then their Blightsteel kills me. And that had ended, like, I was in 10th place, so, like, my sad 4-2 would have made top 8. And at 7:30 in the morning, my red eyes, and I was just, like, ready to have a nervous breakdown. I was like, that's how this is going to end?
Your girlfriend's like, good morning, and you're like, shut up! Don't talk to me.
It was pretty rough.
That sounds awful.
But I guess that bleeds into my first section of my life updates. I've been playing a lot of challenges the last few weeks due to, quarantine life. I've lost quite a few win-ins. I lost 3. I've top-8'd 1 challenge. I've been playing mostly Legacy and Vintage, a little bit of Pioneer here and there. But in Vintage, I've actually switched off PO to the Breach deck. The Lurrus Breach deck is just so much more powerful, and it's not clunky. Like, playing the Paradoxical Outcome deck, you get a lot of clunky draws sometimes. Those just don't exist with PO because all your cards are much more lower to the ground, partially due to the nature of Lurrus. But I've really been enjoying it a lot more.
So what else have you been up to other than just like the magic stuff?
I mentioned in the last podcast that I've been playing lots of Pokemon Blue. Well, I graduated to Pokemon Silver, and I actually beat it about 45 minutes ago. You actually have to beat the Elite Four twice in that game, and the second time I had a Dragonite, and it just wasn't even close. I never had to use a Revive or anything. I just couldn't believe how OP my favorite Pokemon is.
So the important question though, who was your starter?
Typhlu or what's Typhlosion's
Cyndaquil, I believe.
Yeah, that one. I just like fire Pokemon. They're way cooler. I don't know.
Wow, that's interesting because I've always been split on whoever the not fire Pokemon are. Like, I love Squirtle and Bulbasaur equally, and I would just never in my life choose Charmander, no matter how many times I play Pokemon.
Well, how are you going to ban Rite of Flame in Pokemon if you don't choose the starter Pokemon?
All right, I guess if you have a brand to protect.
That makes sense. See, what I usually do is I yeet my starter as soon as possible. Just, like, get them out that make things too easy. Like, your starter stats are so much higher than all the other crap that you're catching in the wild.
You're a degenerate. I don't like it.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. I'm like, you live and die by your starter. Like, your starter at the end should still be in your roster.
So I'm the sort of person who plays Pokemon to battle competitively. And, like, my favorite Pokemon is Shuckle, so all I want to do is cast Toxic on people and watch them bleed to death over 10 turns. So, like, it's basically the same thing I do in Magic, but with cute, cuddly creatures.
I have died to a lot of Toxics, yeah.
But regarding Magic, huge shout out to MTG Meta .io. I think on Twitter they're just MTG Meta.io. I'm sure everyone, by the time they're listening to this, has heard about the Planeswalker point history erase. And they created a GitHub that allows you to download your entire history in a clean Excel doc that I personally uploaded to my Google Sheets with all my other data. And it's super clean. I got to organize it. And I actually tweeted at them to add in the player count for every event. So they have, like, you would finish in 15th place, but you wouldn't know out of how many. So I got them to add in. It turns out that 15th might have been a Star City Games or something. And that's something I personally care about. So I was really appreciative of that.
Yeah. I don't really care about losing my DCI number. Like, I've had that for a while, and, like, it means something. But losing the history was brutal. So I'm glad that gets archived.
Yeah, going back to the scoreboard is very important to me among my circle of friends, where we talk about who's beaten who over the years and who my nemesis is, and just like occasionally dumping all of that information into MTG stats, and that tells you like your win rate against everyone you've played against over the last year or whatever. Like, that's an incredible resource that's just gone if we don't have the core data to shove in there. So I'm glad someone is doing something to at least save what we had once. Hopefully the new system will have some sort of tracker in it.
So I went to mtgmeta.io because .io is a website, and I was actually looking to donate to them, and their donate is so hidden. By the time I got to it, I was like, I don't even know if I want to donate because I had to do so much work just to find it. Yeah. But other than that, like, I'm sure like you guys have a very similar experience here. Quarantine life is really starting to settle in. I had to leave the house for the first time in like 3 weeks today. It was brutal.
Yeah, I have left twice. Once was to drop off my car at the shop. The other was to pick up the car from my shop. And other than that, I've gone on walks. That's it.
Yeah, I've got a daily walk, weather permitting. My girlfriend and I did play Frisbee in the rain last week because we just needed to move, and it was raining, so we just toughed it out. But I'm about due for a grocery store trip. I think we're planning it for tomorrow, so I'm going to be doing that. It's the first time I've gone into public since the masks requirement has been a rule in Pennsylvania. Like, it's been like encouraged already, but it's actually just a rule now. You can't go in the store without it. And I've also been noticing this like subconscious anxiety when I'm watching movies or TV now, where people are just like out doing stuff. Like, I watched The Farewell with Awkwafina the other night. The movie was great, by the way. And like the premise is like grandma's dying of cancer, but she doesn't know that. So they stage a fake wedding in China to like have an excuse for all the family to be around grandma one more time without telling her she has cancer. So, and they're all just like talking about like, yeah, we have to fly over to China. And I was like, you can't do that. Oh my God. Like, that's crazy. But then I realized that that's just like a thing you can do in the normal world. And like all of that stuff. Or like, I was watching season 3 of Fargo, and there's a scene where like the main character's son shows up to work and he's like, hey, I brought burgers. And like he just has like a bag of burgers. He just drove across town to grab them and visit mom at work. I'm like, you can't do that. But you could in 2016 or whatever when that season was filmed. So I have to get my conscious mind to remind my subconscious that, you know, there was a time when you could go outside.
So one interesting thing that I found is I'll be watching a TV show and, you know, I really appreciate the ones that already had their full season edited. Like Westworld, for example, is probably my favorite active TV show. They had the entire season cut and ready to shoot. Like they're like all they had to do was press play every Sunday. It's done. But I also watch Walking Dead that also premieres Sunday nights, and Walking Dead had to shut down their entire production. It turns out 2 weeks out from their final episode, didn't even have it done, and now it's being postponed a couple months. It's just like, how are you not done with your episode that was supposed to release in 2 weeks? I don't know. Like it kind of bothers me a little bit.
I am shocked and relieved hearing this because as a rule, I just don't read about behind the scenes stuff. I want to be transported. I want to be hit with the movie magic. Like that is part of my experience engaging with visual media. But I also noticed that Walking Dead just fucking stopped. Like I just went to watch it one Monday morning and there was no episode, and that was 3 weeks ago. So I'm glad I finally figured out what happened with that.
Yeah, it's so obnoxious. I just feel like the show's run by idiots.
That might be true.
But I really like people that are prepared. And props to Westworld. And season 3 is terrific.
Yep. Better Call Saul is still rolling also. That's actively producing new episodes. I think the season's about wrapping up, but they didn't miss in the middle.
I binged all of season 4 in a day once it hit Netflix. But AMC doesn't share to any streaming services, so I'm just like not watching it right now for the newest season.
Fair enough. Yeah. I think that's probably the best show on TV.
So a special anniversary this week. It is the 3-year anniversary of the banning of Sunsee's Divining Top. And I know this is like, according to the Reddit, an unpopular decision, but I think they banned the right card. Some people talk about terms or counterbalance.
Stupid. Wizards
knocked this one out of the park for once.
I loved the gameplay in the format with Top. I know I'm in the minority there, but like the Top Miracles versus D&T matchups were like so intricate and interesting and such an elaborate dance, and they always went to time, and I loved them. But like, yeah, we've moved on from there. It's fine. I can look fondly on those times and say, okay, we don't need to do that again.
Yeah, I agree. There was a lot of really cool stuff happening in Legacy at the time. Death and Taxes specifically with like Phyrexian Revoker that could turn off the top out of the main deck. Like that was freaking sweet. And like, but like you look at a card like Terminus or Counterbalance, those cards are really embarrassing to put on a ban list. Like Miracles is still good and it still plays those cards, but now they're just like optional. Top just made those 2 cards ridiculous, like sent the already playable card into the stratosphere. I do miss Top out of like mono red painter or like decks that were just using like a value top or like old Doomsday. I guess they don't even need it anymore, but still I think for everyone's sanity, like I have not missed Top myself in 3 years. Like it honestly, if you hadn't told me it had been 3 years, I would have just been like, I don't know, like 1 year, 1.5. When did that I don't know. Like, it just disappeared, and I never looked back. So, rest in peace, buddy.
The only Eternal Weekend I ever... Oops, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The only Eternal Weekend I ever went to was the last one before Top was legal, and every single round went 45 minutes over time. And it was pretty miserable. Like, part of it was that the event itself was a little bit understaffed. The other part was Miracles mirrors went forever. And people would be like, well, if you're just good with your deck, you would never go to time. But from a Wizard standpoint, if you have to put yourself in their shoes, you shouldn't have to respect players to be good with cards in order to play with them. Like, that shouldn't be part of your philosophy, in my opinion. And, like, just telling people if you're bad, you can't play with this card shouldn't be allowed.
Right. And like, the position it puts the person across the table from, because, like, during that era, no matter what deck you were on, if your opponent was like turn 1 top and then like spent a little time thinking about their first activation, you had to be like, you need to play faster. Like, you got to play faster. Like, 48 minutes left in the round, you got to play faster. Like, you don't get this much time. You don't get 45 seconds every time you activate top because it's going to happen 100 times in our match. Like, you got to go. And, like, just being... I think the net stress level, in addition to being a reasonable power level ban, also just, like, the net stress level of every player involved in those games. I'm not sad it's gone.
So something I've never, like, said publicly, but part of the reason why I played Sword of War and Peace in that era was just so that I could connect once or twice and the game would be over.
Yeah. If you win game 1, you win the match. Like, just get in.
All right, but, like, moving on to talk about, like, the current format, I've been playing a lot of Magic to medium results recently. So I've been focused on doing a lot of, like, experimenting and brewing and, like, trying to learn about the format and see what works in this new world. So, like, I'm not focusing on, like, trying to optimize my win rate or anything. I'm trying out new things. And, like, boy, am I burning play points because decks are good right now. So whenever you play a league with something that's a little bit suboptimal, like, you definitely feel it. I feel like I've had a lot of good takes on the format, and, like, I figured things out very quickly, but I just haven't been able to break anything. Like, I figured out that Null Rod was insane very quickly. I figured out that, like, Mana Acceleration was better than Vile very quickly, and just not putting up any real results. Haven't gotten even a 5-0 trophy in the last 2 weeks or anything like that. It's been a little bit rough.
Phil, like you, I've actually been playing a lot of Moto, like prelims. Like, unlike you, I'm not trying to brag, but, like, I've been doing fairly well. But I've been talking to other people, and they're also saying that this is the most they've been playing, not only because of quarantine, but because Legacy is fun right now. Like, it's different, and it's a lot more lower to the ground. Like, it's not, you cast your Uro, I cast my Uro, you play Oko, I answer your Oko, then play my own. Like, it's a lot more interactive. Like, stuff like Nibble Mongoose is seeing play again, and that's fun. Sorry, I know that this is your section, but I just wanted to jump in.
Oh, no, like, I'm totally in agreement. Like, deck building is beyond warped right now, but, like, as far as actual gameplay goes, it's super interesting, and all sorts of crazy stuff is happening. I don't know if you saw, like, the Reddit thread, just, like, talking about all the spicy deck lists, but, like, the Sharknado card saw play in a 5-0 deck list, and, like, that stupid cycling turtle where, like, you cycle it 4 times and then you, like, win the game or some shit like that, like, is also seeing play, and it's just like, what is happening right now? It's nuts.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I know we're going to talk about it more in a lower section, so I'm not going to go too deep. But when we get to the, like, impact of companions section, I want to talk about, like, the full deck building ramifications of a companion, because it's so much deeper than I think anyone expected it to be.
I can't wait.
Yeah. So just a couple of quick words, and then I think it's time to move on, because, like, we have a lot of super cool things to talk about. The format has probably changed more in this 2-week period than I've ever seen in any 2 weeks of Legacy. So in my off time, I've been doing a lot of walking and running. I'm just trying to make sure I get out of the house either every day or every other day just to, like, stay active. And kind of like Bryant, I'm on a nostalgia trip. So in college, with, like, all my roommates and, like, people who lived across the hall from me, we played Diablo 2 together, and, like, we got into the modding community. And then I randomly saw on Reddit that the mod that I played in college, like, a week ago, released a new, like, huge update. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna jump back into this for a little while. So there's gonna go, like, 50 hours of my time, and I won't regret it at all.
You got nothing but time these days. Yeah, so, like, on the subject of video games, I've mentioned Borderlands the last few episodes. I'm into it. I found out that my brother, who he lives out of state, I don't see him very often. I found out he's also gaming on PC during the quarantine, so it's an opportunity to hang out and talk to my brother, who I don't see very often. And he downloaded Borderlands, but it turns out his computer can't handle it. he suggested Dead Island, and then it turns out that the Dead Island Definitive Edition has replaced Dead Island in like the Steam store. So, and he has the original, which is incompatible with the definitive version, so we can't play that unless I find the old version somewhere. So now I'm trying to convince him that Monster Hunter World is where we want to be. So we're trying to find a co-op game together, because co-op gaming right now is basically the only way you can hang out with people.
All right. Why don't we move on to feedback? Bryant, do you want to take this first one here? I feel like it plays most strongly to your strengths.
Wow, making me read the longest one, Phil.
Yeah,
huh?
I'll take the short one that's next.
You could paraphrase it if you don't want to read the full paragraph.
Nah, that's fine. Hey guys, great podcast. I would like to ask you about best approaches to collecting or just analyzing data in the shape of your own matches. Let's say you have a deck and you want to get an idea of its power level in the format. How many matches do you need to record before you form an informed opinion? How often should you reset your recording? Thinking here about shifts in the format, or just might cloud your overall win percentage if you just keep on recording across format shifts? How many matches against a single archetype is really needed to form an opinion? I'm personally 10-0 with Doomsday versus Elves. I feel confident in saying that this is a good matchup there. I'm 3-1 against Omnitel, so I feel much less certain. Any thoughts are much appreciated. Kind regards, Martin, a.k.a. Neville Shoot. And this was from our website contact form, which we don't get a lot of comments in, so thank you, Martin. I'm sure the two of you are also old OGs of Legacy. Martin is an original sourcer from MTG The Source. He used to post a ton back in the day. I know that Martin is from Europe, from across the pond. Really good Magic player. Used to play a lot of Ad Nauseam Tendrils. So, personally, I track every single match I play. I categorize it, but I do break up my matches into overall format shifts. So, like, I'm currently in my post-breach shift right now. I didn't switch with companions and non-companions. Maybe that's something I'll do down the road if it ends up being necessary. But I usually do like bans or printings of major cards. I did a new one for Modern Horizons because it shook up the format so much. I felt like that was needed. So for certain subsets, so like let's say this is something I was struggling with myself post-breach. I was 5-5 against Death and Taxes after 10 matches. And it felt like in a lot of those 10 matches that I got pretty unlucky. But then again, Deafening Silence has been released, and that card's really good against me. But historically, I'm much closer to 75 to 80% against Death and Taxes. And I was like, I can't believe I'm 50% after 10 matches. Maybe the deck just got so much better against me. That said, I've continued to play, and my matches are now leveling out to the mean where I'm much closer to 70% now after I've been playing more. And I feel like you will hit that mean if your data set just gets larger and larger. I personally start looking at deck list percentage results around 70 to 75 matches. I know some people do 50, but there's still a lot of variance in 50 matches, in my opinion. Do you two have any opinions on that?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, you first.
So I can account for when we're really trying to pin down matchup percentages. Like I've done full team Pro Tour testing. The last Pro Tour Phoenix, I worked with Matt Sperling and Paul Rietzel and Cyrus and a big team of powerful wizards. And we started off by just like going out into the leagues and seeing what happened. And then when we thought we were onto something or we needed a better picture, we would just do like a 20 game set, just like heads up, like you play your deck, I'll play the enemy deck, and just slam it out and see what happens. And if you really need to know what a matchup percentage is like, that's how you do it. Because just going into the leagues and hoping to get some information, like, I guess it depends on what you're doing with the information. Like, if you're just going to play Magic with the deck you want to play, and then you just want to know how maybe it'll inform some sideboarding decisions or what. But if you really want to, like, fundamentally understand the matchup, you have to just get a friend and jam reps with it to really pin down what it's about and how you can change the percentage, what the percentage actually is, all of those things.
I would agree with that if you're only looking for a specific matchup. If you're looking for, like, a greater range. I don't hate just data mining through leagues personally. I'll often use it to change sideboard slots. Like if I'm 80% against Miracles, but I'm struggling against the mid-range decks, I might cut that 5th sideboard slot for a mid-range slot, or maybe something that could be used in both, like a rending volley or something crazy. Just a thought.
Right. So if you're on the deck and you just want to know how your deck performs, just running Leagues Forever is the right way to do. Because like Bryant obviously is heavily invested in the Epic Storm. So just knowing what the Epic Storm is performing like over massive amounts of data is the result. If you're looking for something specific, like if Lurrus Grixis Delver is the best deck and you have 100k coming up next weekend and you're not sure if your deck can beat Lurrus Grixis Delver, you need to find a friend and figure out if you can beat it. Or else you just need to get off the deck. So like unless you're married to a deck, like if you're trying to find a deck versus trying to tune a deck, that changes your process as well.
Another thing, just in terms of data size, most of the data that you as an individual collects will not actually have real statistical significance. And so a lot of times you need to rely on sort of the feel that you are getting for the matchup. Kind of like Bryant was talking about with like Death and Taxes versus Storm matchups. Like your data may say one thing, but you might feel unfavored every game. And that might be sort of like the real indication of what's happening there. So if you're just jamming leagues and you have 10 matches versus a deck, you might be 7-3, but every single time you're on the ropes and you're struggling, and that might be the real indication of what's actually going on there. So one thing that I've done in the past, like when I didn't have access to testing partners, is I would just like proxy up the other deck. I would sit down with my deck and the other deck and just kind of like look at how both sides of the matchup would play out. Like I just kind of like play face up, try to think about like, what do I need to be thinking about from each turn, and like really try to think about the turn cycles, what my roles are in the matchup. And that sort of thing helped me out a lot before I had really good testing partners and the availability of Magic Online to play 3,000 games.
So a little bit of a funny thing here. When Breach hit the format, I started out 2-4, and I was like, well, it's not as bad as I thought it would be for the deck playing Forcible and Silence. It could be worse. And then I think I finished by the time Breach was banned like 3-17. Like I just couldn't beat that deck at all. And by the time people had learned how to play Breach and quit losing to themselves, I was just like a 10% favorite. Like I just could not beat that deck. All right, so Phil, why don't you take the next comment?
Okay, so this is from one of the followers of my stream, the Innistrad Revenue Service, the IRS. Did any of you expect Grixis Delver to go as far as being willing to cut Gurmag Angler and possibly True Name, depending on the build, arguably their premier threats for the Lurrus requirement? We actually got a reply from the great Wilson Hunter. He said, yes, period. So one of the things we really focused on last episode was how good we thought Lurrus was. We definitely thought that that was going to be the best card in the format. Now, I think I speak for all of us when I say, like, we definitely thought the companion mechanic was insanely powerful, but I don't know that we foresaw quite this degree of change in the format in such a quick amount of time. What say you two?
Yeah, so like if we're talking about like paradigm shifts, like beat 'em or join 'em kind of breaks in the legacy format as we knew it previously, nothing has hit this hard. Like I don't know how far back, like I can't speak to like the release of Mercadian Masks or whatever, but like paradigm shifting cards like Oko took a little while, like, oh, maybe I'll try one. Oh, I'll go to 2. Now control decks just play 4. So like that took a while to gain some speed. Ren and 6 even after several major events, like this very podcast was still like, maybe it's bannable. I'm not sure. Like it's pretty good. And that was after like multiple premiere events. So, and like Breach, people were like building it wrong, building it weird. Eventually they dialed it in and it was absolutely heinous, but like nothing really just snapped the format like this, like right in the face as soon as the set dropped, the way companions have.
I think it's a twofold thing. It's a combination of like both the crazy power level of these cards and the fact that everyone is at home just playing Magic all the time.
I do think that's part of it. The interesting thing to me is that people are either I love playing with these or I hate playing with these, and we'll get into a little bit more, but so many people enjoy playing with these, and it doesn't feel, at least to me, and Phil might have a different opinion here because he's on the opposite end of the spectrum for having one for my deck, is I almost feel like if some of the people that were unhappy had one that fit their strategy, maybe there'd be less people upset because it feels good like always having something to do with your mana. And I know that's crazy, but they're enjoyable to play with, and I've seen a lot of tweets today being like, just because you're having fun doesn't mean it's healthy. Okay, sure. But if everyone's having fun, let's say hypothetically in a perfect world, everyone is having a blast, does that mean it's not healthy? I don't know if that's true.
I mean, just like a hypothetical, imagine that Eldrazi aggro got to start with an X cost creature as a companion that had some deck building requirement that like wasn't super scary to them, right? So they can always mulligan to Thorn, Chalice, whatever, and then always have the follow-up threat. Like, there's so many decks that could benefit greatly from there being more companions. So like the mechanic is obviously like super busted, but if you said there's going to be 50 more companions over the next 3 years, I would take a deep breath and go, okay, this is Legacy now, let's do it.
Yeah, so like I think the issue is that like Luris fits so nicely into several pre-existing decks that people don't feel good about it. Unless you're winning with it. If you were already a Storm player and you just got this thing literally for free, then that's pretty sweet. But like the other decks have real decisions to make. Like the Zerda decks, like they lose Chalice to the Void and they lose Monastery Mentor, and like now they just have to be a combo deck. So like that's a real cost. Putting 80 cards in your Miracles deck is a real cost to get Yorion. Only playing even cost cards, you lose out on Force of Will for your Gyruda combo deck. Like these are
Force of Negation as well.
Yeah, and you can't protect your Gyruda with that anyway. But yeah, you lose all the forces, and like these are real costs. So we're going to talk about that as we go forward. But like, it's not like everyone just gets a free starter Pokemon now, and it has better stats than all the other Pokemon you meet in the wild. Like you need to sacrifice to make it happen.
All right. So just, I guess we should kind of push the episode along and like get into our nice talking points in order. But before we do that, I think we did miss a couple of cards in our set review. We were kind of rushed through the end of it because we talked for a long time because this is Eternal Glory. But we failed to talk about the Triome lands last time around, which, as expected, are seeing play in 4-color Loam. And we failed to mention Wilt, which is green and a colorless... Is it Destroy or Exile?
It's Destroy.
Destroy.
It's just strictly better Naturalize. It's Naturalize with Cycling 2.
Yeah, and that's been seeing a play in a lot of the, like, quote-unquote Miracles-ish decks.
Yeah, so I recorded a league with... a 4-color Yorion build of my design earlier today. I just wanted to beat Delver and play 80 cards to do it, and that was the first time I put Wilt in a constructed deck. And I played against Delver 3 times, I brought in Wilt every time, and didn't feel bad at all. Because normally you have to make the decision of like, do I want this disenchant just in case they draw their Winter Orb? And it's like, yep, it cycles. Freebie. You can even like cycle it early and snap it back later. Like, just putting cycling on such a utility card is kind of dumb. Honestly, if I'm mad about anything in this set, it's Wilt. Like, way madder about Wilt than the companions existing. Just philosophically.
I added Wilt into my Pioneer Lotus Breach deck, and like Brian was saying, if you don't need it, you just cycle it, and it feels so good. Like, this card did not need to exist. Like, strictly better Naturalize already existed. I can't think of the Return to Nature. Is that it? The one that also exiles a card from a graveyard? Like, you don't need something even better than Return to Nature. Like, Return to Nature was power creep enough, but then to like 6 months later go, it wasn't quite good enough, and just add draw a card to it, that's insane.
I think the tinfoil hat theory is that a lot of these cards are being designed for best of one on MTG Arena. So you want to be able to have these, like, quote-unquote sideboard cards in your main deck that also have some other degree of utility on them.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of twofold, and they're both arena-based. Like, best of one is part of it. Like, I would never like, I've been drafting a lot. Like, I actually just really love the arena interface and grinding up my collection on there, like, free-to-play. If you get, like, 5 wins out of a draft, out of a possible 7, you've made money. So, like, it's really good value to draft on arena. And, like, I've been putting, like, Wilt and the Dimensional Breach or whatever it's called, the Exile 3 enchantments card, just in my main deck because you can cycle it. And the other half of that, I think, is that if Magic wants to be an esport, it needs to reduce obvious variance wherever it can without losing being Magic the Gathering. Like, we can't just become Hearthstone where you get a free mana every turn and you just linearly accrue resources as the game goes on, because then it's not Magic anymore. But, like, Luis Scott Vargas losing the finals of the Pro Tour on camera with the whole world watching because he mulled to 4 and his opponent didn't, like, that's bad for the game. And, like, it's part of the game, and those of us who are invested in the game get it, but it's very bad for the game. Like, some kid who just, like, mulls to 4 his, like, first week on Arena, then just deletes it because he's not that invested. Like, we just lost a Magic player for life. So the cycling mechanic is just really nice about reducing variance.
I'm not sure if you saw it, but today there was an article released that had Magic ranked as a Tier 2 esport. There's only 3 other games in the Tier 1, and then Tier 2 is about 8 other games. But I mean, that puts Magic in roughly the top 10 esports games, which seems kind of crazy if you think about it. And it makes, if I'm sitting at the head of Wizards, I'm feeling pretty good if Magic the Gathering is considered a top 10 esport.
Is that actually true, though? Like, when I think all of the esports that I've invested time into watching, like, Magic doesn't come close. I don't know. Like, I watched a decent amount.
They're just going off of Twitch viewership, I believe.
Oh, okay. Sure.
All right, yeah. If there's some hard data, then that makes some sense. But I definitely, as someone who gets Magic, even, like, I don't watch a whole lot of coverage, but I don't get League of Legends at all. I've never played a game. Like, I understand, like, basically what the teams are trying to do, but I don't understand any of the actual application of those skills or, like, how to get to the endpoint. But I will watch an entire League of Legends tournament because it's just entertaining. And I don't think that Magic is even close to that value for, like, an uninvested watcher. But it's cool that we are somewhere on a list. And whatever Magic is doing to make it more exciting to watch for the rando is going to be good for all of us over time.
So when do we get the Magic Online Euro noises where it's like, or whatever it does? Yes, thank you. That's what I was looking for.
Well, funny enough, let me tell you, since you brought it up, Magic Online noises. I co-streamed with Phil last week. I joined him on his stream. We played the Erosa deck that I was really into before the companions ruined the format for it. But I had to trade Phil some cards. I think he needed like 4 Mishra's Bauble and 2 Uro, and it was like $400 or something worth of cards that he needed to borrow. So, like, I logged into Magic Online on my desktop. I normally play it on my laptop. And I had my headphones on and everything. I was ready to stream. And just the theme music that I had not turned off yet because I don't play it on my desktop just piped into my brain. And it hurt so bad. And I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. I don't think you can from the screen. So you have to endure it for the login period and the loading period before you can find how to turn it off. And whoever thought that was a good idea, that was not one of the better changes to Magic Online.
All right.
So why don't we head into our first section? We're almost 40 minutes in. Section 1 is called Keeping an Open Mind. And before we get into this, I'd like to start off by saying that this is a small rib on our lovely co-host Phil. I respect his legacy opinions. He's a terrific legacy player and a great person. But boy, Phil, were you wrong.
Well, kind of, but we'll talk about that.
But we had a conversation before we recorded our last episode, and it was on a legacy figure in the community memeing on Drannith Magistrate and the hypothetical death and taxes cards that get printed. And I thought that maybe Drannith Magistrate could be playable one day in the right metagame, and getting sideboard options was okay. And not everyone views it as that way. They might want a card they can play in their main deck, which I totally understand. But as someone who plays with Burning Wish, I look at every bad instant, or I shouldn't say instant, every bad sorcery that comes out. And I think, is this a theoretical Burning Wish target? And if it's even slightly playable, I get a copy for my Stormbinder for maybe one day. And that's how I often look at cards.
Yeah, so when I evaluated Drannith Magistrate, and when this same person did, it was in the context of like this metagame and every metagame that had existed in the past X number of years. And the card was not playable. It has a number of problems. It doesn't play particularly well with a lot of things that were going on with the deck. And then it turns out that Companion was just the most busted mechanic ever printed, like probably better than things like Dredge, Phyrexian Mana, Storm. And I totally eat crow on this one, and like Drannith Magistrate is absolutely a playable legacy card.
So something that I've always personally felt is like metagames change. And I remember playing 10 years ago and thinking like, this card's going to be good forever, being Infernal Tutor. And now the year's 2020 and I don't even play Infernal Tutor anymore. So like, keeping things in the back of your head, in my opinion, is like a super helpful thing to do, and understanding that like things aren't always going to stay the same. And I think a lot of people get hung up on that about like Veil of Summer in particular, because they're like, Dress isn't good anymore, Veil needs to be banned. But like, your cards don't have the right to always be playable. And it's like sort of interesting when these sort of things happen, because then a whole new slew of cards become playable. Like, remember Hope of Girper, how like that didn't see play for almost an entire year after it was printed? And then I started testing it because of Mox Opal. And now we're at the point where like even Stormlists that play green don't play Xanad Swarm, they play Hope of Girper, just because like Magic's changed. And just like reevaluating things when reevaluating cards when metagame shifts happen is like kind of awesome, and it's a good thing to do. And I think that's what MM17 did when they did well in the challenge with their aggro Death and Taxes list.
Just like before we move on to start talking about that, because like there's actually a lot to dig into here. Like the first thing I want to make clear is like it is okay to be wrong. It is okay to have a bad take, but just like say like, yeah, I was totally wrong about that. Like move on, start testing with new cards if necessary. Like it's not worth like taking your last stand on the hill to say Drannith Magistrate is not a legacy playable card. Blah, 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 blah. Like that's not worth your time. Like again, everyone underestimated just how good Companion was, and it's crazy. But most of the legacy decks like have probably changed by at least like 15 cards. I don't know, like I didn't do any like actual data checking or anything, but like lists have changed so much in the past couple of weeks.
So one thing that bothers me a little bit about Drannith Magistrate, and this is more of a Magic complaint than it is a card complaint, is things aren't symmetrical anymore, and they really should be. Like I was facing Drannith Magistrate in Vintage, and my opponent played their Lurrus, and then started casting cards out of their graveyard, and I was like, what? And I realized it only says your opponents. What happened to like the good old days when like powerful effects like that were symmetrical, and like if you named Swords to Plowshares with your Meddling Mage, you could theoretically get your own stuck in your hand.
Can confirm, have Meddling Mage Lurrus in the past week multiple times while playing Lurrus. Life's weird.
Yeah, well, that goes back to what I said about Arena and being friendly to new players. Magic figured out close to a decade ago that Hexproof sells more packs than Shroud, and you're seeing the same thing being applied to all new mechanics. Like, I agree, it was kind of sweet that, like, Lord of Atlantis made any random merfolk your opponent might have also unblockable. Like, oh no, I've been betrayed. I have to consider that. But at the same time, like, the person who would appreciate that interplay is not going to quit Magic because they got killed by their own Lord of Atlantis. The like random kid might. So it just purely as far as the game has grown a lot in the last decade. Like enormously, and these are big reasons why, even if they feel kind of dirty in the older formats.
So one of the things that Phil and I were talking about before the last episode was like trying out new things, and maybe Dragon's Magistrate might have been actually better than Phil was giving it credit for. And I suggested that maybe to Phil that we reevaluate the entire shell of Death and Taxes. I was admittedly thinking more of a prison-esque shell and not the aggro version that MM17 was playing. But in my head, I was thinking maybe cutting Aether Vial and running like Ancient Tombs and Chalices in the main deck. And it looks like MM17 was thinking something similar but different with cutting Aether Vials for hard acceleration with like Lotus Petals and Mox Ambers, and it was super interesting. Phil's welcome to disagree with me. He's the expert on Death and Taxes here. But I think part of D&T's problem is that it has all of its eggs in too many baskets. It's the control deck in some matchups, it's the prison deck in others, and in some matchups it's the aggro or mid-range deck. And sometimes it just feels a little bit unfocused, or you draw your wrong part of your deck for that specific matchup.
Okay, so this is going to sound really ridiculous to say, given how many hate bears there are, but, like, hear me out. Part of the problem is that there aren't enough good cards to build focused versions of Death and Taxes. Despite the fact that there's so many hate bears available, when you like look at them and you think which ones are aggressively costed, which ones do enough, and also have an appropriately sized body to be competitive, the pool's actually really small, and many of the cards fight against each other. So, for example, Leonin Arbiter is like a really good like taxation effect, but it plays against many of the other cards that you might want to play in the shell, like Recruiter of the Guard, Stoneforge Mystic, Squadron Hawk. And you run into a lot of problems like that, or you run into a lot of problems where when you play these hyper-aggressive hate bear shells, you start losing when you get behind. When you're playing, 18 tutus in your deck, and your opponent plays a Tarmogoyf, you go, oh, crap. And like you just kind of fold to it. So by necessity, Death and Taxes needs to have a variety of tools so that it can have answers. And like part of it is the tools don't always exist in like the theoretical way that you want to. The best example being the thing that all Death and Taxes players want, which is like an effective Rest in Peace spare. And we get Remorseful Cleric, which like does things, but it's often not quite good enough at doing what it does. If your opponent plays Tarmogoyf and you Remorseful Cleric their graveyard, they might still have a 3/4 Goyf, and you didn't actually hate away that card at all.
So, Phil, I will say this. I kind of understand your pain. So before Echo of Aeons was printed, the TES community had quit playing Past in Flames, because Past in Flames for a long time we knew was the worst card in our 75, but there just wasn't anything better. So we were playing fun cards like Mizzix's Mastery, if you know what that is, to flashback and discard it ad nauseum. And we were back to trying diminishing returns because we were already in on Mox Opal at the time. We were like, well, if we're playing Mox Opal, that's similar to the Simian Spirit Guides we played in 2008. Maybe we'll try diminishing returns again. But we always knew that Mizzix's Mastery and diminishing returns weren't quite good enough, but despite being better than the Past in Flames in our deck. So we were really fortunate to have Echo of Aeons printed, and I understand that desire to have something slightly better printed. But I will say this is where we might disagree a little bit. I feel like Death and Taxes is more likely to get those cards than the Storm Mechanic these days, with the way that Magic's, its philosophy.
Yeah, in the article I wrote, it's probably like a month ago now, like I talked a lot about how Death and Taxes went on this like 5-year hot streak of printings, and now, relatively speaking, we're kind of on a cooler. We haven't gotten quite as many pushed cards as we might. And that's part of the reason why I've been experimenting a lot. So I've been very loudly vocalizing to the Legacy community that I think Vial is not a good card in Legacy anymore, and that you need to be playing mana acceleration. So over the past 2 weeks, I've been playing like Lotus Petal and Chrome Mox versions of D&T. I've been playing Search Stompy with both of those, and Suppression Field. I've been trying Luris.
What is Search Stompy?
Search Stompy plays Leonin Arbiter and Suppression Field, accelerating them out, and tries to play a turn 1 locked piece into a turn 2 locked piece as consistently as possible. So your opener might look like Suppression Field into Leonin Arbiter, or Chalice of the Void into Thalia, or something like that. The deck list is still a little loose. It's something that I brewed up with all of my subs. But like, this is the time for exploration if we've ever had one. And you've seen other pilots seeing similar things. So like Eddie Zamora 5-0'd with Luris,
Humans.
Yeah, I think it was like Luris Lotus Petal Humans. And I was seeing Luris Goblins, I think, which also had Lotus Petals. It's kind of a crazy world out there right now.
So one of the things that I like about the aggro D&T list from MM17 is that I think historically one of the things Death and Taxes has always struggled with, or at least from my side of the table, is bridging that gap from turn 1 to turn 2. And your list that you're talking about with Chromox and Lotus Petal, they all do that. You're able to cast a turn 1 Hate Bear, but historically, living till turn 2 has always been a problem against Storm, Reanimator, and some of these other faster combo decks. In Deafening Silence, it bridged that gap, and I feel like that's why I started to see, like I talked about it earlier, my win percentage shift on for a little bit. Because Deafening Silence changes that, where they can now go turn 1 Silence and a turn 2 Thalia, and that's often good enough for them to get their secondary Hate Bears on the table and for me to lose. And I think that one of the things about the aggro D&T list is it was really one of the first lists to not play Deafening Silence, but bridge that gap with Lotus Petal and Mox Amber. And it sort of fixed that issue without ever actually having to play Deafening Silence. And that's pretty big.
Yeah, I was talking to, is it Laverde? Anthony Laverde? Is that the correct pronunciation?
Correct.
I was talking to him earlier today, and he was saying, like, when D&T goes, like, Deafening Silence into Thalia, he feels like he's, going to win that matchup 5% of the time, or something like that. Like, that's just an absolutely brutal opener. But for so many other combo decks in the format, Deafening Silence doesn't actually do very much. Like, if you're playing against Show and Tell, like, you slow them down, but you don't actually stop their combo. And the same is true of things like Reanimator and Infect. So a lot of times, like, you can play a Deafening Silence and still die to their, like, quote-unquote combo pretty easily. And I think the mana acceleration has let me make stronger plays more consistently. When you go turn 1 Thalia into turn 2 Revoker your thing, into turn 3 play a third follow-up thing, that ends up being way stronger than, like, Deafening Silence into first bear, I think.
So while we titled this section, like, keeping an open mind about, like, card choices and stuff about, like, card choices and future metagames and things like that, this isn't really just about D&T. It's good to keep an open mind about everything, and that includes companions, which transitions us into our next section. But so many people are ready to dismiss companions before ever even really giving them a real shot. And it was a joke, but somebody that's prominent in the Legacy community had a post about, I played a single league with companions, these things need to be banned. That is not a realistic approach. You cannot get an informed opinion off of one league where you're going in biased already. You have to play a number of matches and, like, really give things a fair shakeout before you can have a strong opinion that's reasonable. Because a lot of people actually enjoy playing with companions, and I'm not sure if they're here to stay. And I'm not the one that chooses that, but I'm going to enjoy them while I can.
So, Brian, you've been playing Magic for quite some time. I assume you were playing when, like, the Planeswalkers first came out, right? And a lot of people kind of acted in a very, like, the sky is falling way when Planeswalkers came out, and I'm kind of seeing some similar things with Companions here. Do you have any thoughts on that as someone who's been around the format for a long time?
Yeah, so, like, Planeswalkers, it took a while for them to get crazy. I think it was like Jace the Mind Sculptor when people were really like, oh no. Because, like, the first round of Planeswalkers didn't really do anything. They were all just, like, the most middle-of-the-road fair, this is representative of the color pie for this particular type of creature. And, like, they all just, like, plussed for some small value, minus to draw a card, and minus a bigger number to win the game. That was just, like, the formula at first. And then Jace shifted the paradigm, but, like, I don't think that anyone freaked out quite the same way that they are about companions. Also, for what it's worth, like in the past year, if you follow Magic Twitter at all, people are recalling for the like retroactive ban or like nerf, like functional nerf of Planeswalkers now. Like it's just really strange. I don't know if you guys have seen these conversations happening, but I follow like Ben Stark and like Hall of Famers and like real Magic pros, not just the Legacy community, and it comes up like probably once a week where someone's like, would Magic be a better game without Planeswalkers? Poll yes or no. And it's like, well, they're here. They are just fundamentally tied to Magic's brand at this point. There is a TV show in production about like Planeswalkers and their adventures. Like, what good does this conversation have? So I think that we need to approach companions more like, here they are, so what, now what? Rather than like, these gotta go. Like
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't think
I agree with Bryant that like people calling like especially like I haven't played a match of Vintage yet in this format, but I follow all of the major Vintage voices, and they all seem uniformly displeased with Luris because like in a format with actual Black Lotus, it's just like if Black Lotus is in your opening hand, you have a 3/2 lifelink plus whatever else you were going to do. It's just literally free. And so like I can see where that would be problematic, but in Legacy, my experience has been pretty positive. Like the games are really interesting. Like I have a bunch of Legacy videos up, and I talk a lot in real time about like how I'm planning for the second wave. Like it's now like on an ancient battlefield where you know the other team has reserves. It's like you're not just beating the army in the field. You know there's a reserve coming, and you know exactly what it's capable of in this case. So we're actually better suited than ancient warriors to plan for the next round. But like, if like normally it's like I Supreme Verdict Delver, I'm good, I'm stable. But now it's like, okay, so I'm gonna have to Supreme Verdict on the following turn. They go Luris, recast Delver, and I need a backup plan for Wave 2, which is really interesting to me. Like, I don't know how you guys feel, but I've had a lot of fun with that, like navigating that and having reserves of my own.
So I was playing a match on stream versus a Yorion deck. I forget the person's username, but it was like Champ something or other, a very good Miracles player. And like I have like 4 counterspells in my hand and a Swords to Plowshare, and my chat is like screaming at me like, "Why aren't you answering that Uro? Why aren't you answering that Uro?" And I'm going, if I answer the Uro, if I fight over this Uro, I can't win the fight over Yorion, and I will lose this match. Like, it's really weird. Like when you have limited resources to work with, and you know the companion is on the horizon, it's really interesting what it does to games.
Yeah, I recorded just today. I brewed up a Yorion list. I wanted to beat Delver, so I just played all 8 Strixes, 4 Supreme Verdict, just like plus all the normal like Oko Astrolabe stuff. And I did in fact 3-0 Delver in my league, but my last round of the league, round 5, was a Yorion Mirror, and it was phenomenal. Like it was among the best Magic I've played, like the most fun, because like you get into these battles where just like material on the board matters. Like I have 2 Astrolabes and 2 Abundant Growths. My Yorion's good for 4. Theirs is only good for 2. So like that's part of the metric. And then it's like, can I answer this 4/5 is another part of the metric. And then the final game of my league, it ended with me never casting my Yorion. Like I got a little bit ahead. They had to go for a YOLO Yorion for 1. Like they had 1 Abundant Growth. And I just like plowed the Yorion and then took over with my like Snapcasters and Oko. And Yorion was just, I had probably 10 turns I could have cast it, but it was just like, I don't need to. I'm still ahead. Keep the reserves in reserve. Like that feels so good. It's so cool.
Oh man, it feels so bad when you're on the other side of that.
Oh yeah.
Where you're just like, please just cast it. Please just take a draw 3.
Right. Like and that came up in the league too. Like I played against, I think 3 or 4, I think it was 3 Luris decks, 3 Delver decks, 2 of them had Luris, and then I played against a non-Delver Luris deck. So 3 Lurrus decks, and like the positions where my opponent didn't cast their Lurrus if they didn't have to were better for them. Like, so many times I was just like, okay, it's turn 4, please cast Lurrus, get your Mongoose back, and then lose it all to Supreme Verdict. Like, they're bleeding me out slowly with 1 Goose, and it's like, alright, please get the 2nd Goose in play and the Lurrus so I can Supreme Verdict all of them. And then, like, you have to manage that, and it's just really dynamic gameplay.
So to go back to the Planeswalker thing for a second, last week I tweeted about how Companion and the reaction was similar to Planeswalkers. And like Brian said, the original Planeswalkers probably weren't as good as the original Companions, and that's fair. But would you guys say that the Companions are similar to 2020 Planeswalkers? Like, is Oko on the same power level as Lurrus? Because I would say so.
I'd say that Lurrus is stronger, even. But, like, they're in the same ballpark.
Yeah, that's probably similar. Like, as far as the actual effects that Lurrus has, like, it's a 3-mana sorcery speed permanent that generates a card's worth of value every turn, which is comparable to Oko. It's just, like, it's always in your opening hand at the cost of you don't get to play Oko. So,
Exactly.
I don't think it's better than Oko, but it's on a similar power level. And for what it's worth, I think Oko is an appropriate power level for Legacy. I know some people don't agree with that, but I don't think he's insane. He's strong, obviously, but I don't think he's particularly bannable.
It's more frustrating than anything else.
Yes, it is true that Oko is a paradigm shifter, and so is Lurrus, and it's just another shift in the meta here. And for what it's worth, in an earlier section, it was thrown out that Companion might be more broken than Dredge, Phyrexian Mana, or Storm, and I don't think any of those things are true, for whatever that's worth. Like, I think that all 3 of those mechanics are significantly more BS and unreasonable to exist than the Companion mechanic, and we've gotten used to all of those.
So one thing that I want to point out is it's so much easier to deal with a Companion than it is a Planeswalker or the Storm Trigger. And a lot of people forget that Lurrus is still just a 3/2 creature. It dies to Bolt. As the guy also casting Lurrus frequently, my Lurrus rarely lives. It gets hit by Bolt, it gets bounced by Karakas, it gets Oko'd. People act as if it's like Lurrus lives on the table and is never touched. And a lot of the other Storm players that I interact with, I've seen some of their list recently, and they're like sideboarding 2 Deadweight and multiple Tormod's Crypts, and a bunch of other like really cute cards, and I personally don't really like those cards, but I asked them, how often do you expect your Lurrus to live more than 2 turns? Because if it's alive for more than 2 turns, you've already won. And like requiring Deadweight every turn isn't really what you want to be doing. And I think people will learn how to properly build around their Companions, but I think not necessarily everyone's there right now. And that's another interesting sub-game of these Companions. I know that I, for one, love to see a Lurrus revealed across the table from me, because like Lurrus could be anything. It could be Aggro D&T, it could be Dark Depths, it could be the Storm Mirror, it could be Miracles, it could be Delver. And I understand that like Lurrus shouldn't be played in every single archetype. Sure. Like, but I happen to enjoy the sub game of trying to figure out what my opponent's playing and like how they're using their Lurrus and everything else. And if everyone's happy playing Lurrus, maybe that will change when there's more Companions out there, but right now it's super fun.
Yeah, we're also in the early days still of everyone is playing Lurrus because they're pushing what this card can do. We may settle in that that's not the right thing to do. Like, a really fascinating deck building decision I saw was an Elves list that Julian posted. I believe Hello Newton was the original creator of the deck. The deck had the Natural Order package. It had Craterhoof Behemoth and Archon of Valor's Reach in the main deck, and it had Lurrus in the sideboard. So you can't reveal Lurrus because those cards obviously cost way more than 2, but there's multi-levels of sideboarding where in the Delver matchups, they would cut the Natural Order package and suddenly be a Lurrus companion deck. And in other grindy non-Delver matchups, they would just board in Lurrus as a creature in their deck and still not be a companion deck, but they would have this grindy engine to dig for. And like, the implications of that are just bananas to me, where like, there's like 3 different decks, like 3 different ways to use a companion, all in 175, and that's really, really interesting.
So that kind of goes into our next point, which was like the top 8 was 75% companion decks. And like Brian said, people are experimenting right now. They want to test the limits. They want to see what they can do. So a lot more people are playing companions right now than I think will average out in the long run. And part of this is like people are getting like Brewer's advantage from trying different things. So like if you look at Martin Medmitten's white Steel Stompy list, I think once that deck is solved and people know that it exists, it'll be harder to win with it. But no one knew what Martin Medmitten was doing when he lost the finals of the challenge, or maybe he won the challenge. I think it was lost the finals, but like it's something new and interesting, and people like testing these new and interesting decks. And you're not necessarily forced to play with companions. Like Eldrazi's as strong as ever right now. Like Eldrazi is in the top 4 decks on Goldfish, and it's still surviving and thriving in this new world because everyone's now playing a deck that loses to a Chalice on 1 or a Chalice on 2.
Yeah, and on that note, MM's deck list, oh my god, does it fold to a Chalice on 1? And I was so thankful that nobody knew that. Like, I kept playing against these Chalice decks, and I'm like, I'm going to play as if they board the Chalice out because they don't know my deck list, because, like, I'm so dead if they Chalice on 1. And, like, that's the Brewer's advantage sort of thing, where when people don't know what you're doing and they don't know how to play optimally, you can get a huge leg up.
So another thing that Brian mentioned on the intro, and I was hoping he wouldn't until we got to this section, but Bomberman lost Chalice to the Void. That's a real cost to playing that card. They can't play Trinisphere either. Not that they did before, but like sometimes it would be a card you would get with Karn. And Miracles all of a sudden either has to choose between playing 80 cards and having Oko, Uro, Back to Basics, and Teferi, or being a Lurrus deck where they don't get Oko and all those cards. Oh, I guess that's what I was saying before. But like between playing Yorion and Lurrus, like that's a cool and interesting decision. And like Delver lost Brazen Borrower, which answers Dark Depths, Trinity Nemesis for the Mirror, and Gurmag Angler. And I know it seems like every deck is now playing Lurrus, but like Storm's really the only one that just got to slide it in. And even so, the Storm decks aren't even like the best Lurrus decks right now, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, just today in my Yorion League, I played against Jeskai Delver with a Stoneblade package, and they just chose that having True Name Nemesis and Batterskull in their deck was worth more than Lurrus. So, like, it's already starting to bear out that it's not free. There's a real decision to make.
You know how weird it is to play Death and Taxes without Flicker Wisp? Flicker Wisp is your frickin' get-out-of-jail-free card for your opponent doing any bullshit, and losing that is so bad. Like, I was playing the White Weenie deck, and my opponent played Ensnaring Bridge in game 1, and I just looked at it, and I'm like, well, I literally can't beat that card, but I'm going to play it out so they know I can't beat, like, so they don't know that I don't have outs to it.
Yeah, that Flicker Wisp was exactly the card I thought of when I was just, laying in bed thinking about Legacy one night, and I was like, I was thinking, what does each deck lose if they try to become Lurrus? And Death and Taxes, I was like, oh, they lose Flicker Wisp, they can't do it. So, like fundamentally changes the Death and Taxes deck, in addition to the Stoneblade package, of course. Like, Batterskull and the swords are gone, but Flicker Wisp was the one, even more than Stoneforge Mystic, where I was like, whoa, that's a big loss.
So, we mentioned it earlier, but, like, we're seeing smaller decks due to Lurrus because you obviously need to play permanents that cost 2 or less. And so we're seeing a return to Nimble Mongoose, partially because it's so good against, like, the Jeskai Lurrus deck. And we're seeing less Haymaker magic, and that means like Uros and Okos and these huge bombs that are just like mythic rares that end the game if they take over. We're seeing more cards that are like classic legacy cards like Portent, Counterbalance, Spell Pierce, Stifle, like these throwback legacy cards that are still very good, but they're not the Haymaker magic that's been popular the last 2 years. And it leads to more, in my opinion at least, more like interesting and dynamic magic. And it's like feels fun playing with cards from when I was, in my teens or whatever, revealing my age now. But so I've mentioned this a couple times, but I wonder what it would look like maybe in 2 years when there's 30 companions to choose from, and maybe not everyone's playing Lurrus. Maybe now there's a better Death and Taxes companion. Maybe Mono Red Stompy has a Rabble Masker-esque companion, and people will have everyone will have something that they can play that fits into their strategy with some sort of weird drawback.
Man, if I could just play that stupid elk while also playing Chalice, like, I'd be pretty happy. Like, vanilla 5/5 that's a companion in red. Like, we could make that work if I could still play Chalice.
Yeah, I gotta say, I hope that it is not the direction of Magic, that we just have 30 companions to choose from 2 years out. Maybe like 20 years out if we're up to 30. But I hope this is not, they don't become like Planeswalkers. And I don't think they're going to. I'm pretty sure this is like part of Ikoria lore, that you just have a friend to adventure with, a beast friend. But maybe one will pop out in a Commander product. But like Commander has already made it clear they're not super stoked on the companions. So I don't know. I don't think we're going to get any more companions for a very long time.
So you don't see them doing a return to Ikoria every 2 years for more companions?
I certainly hope not. Well, Ikoria is not really that compelling, honestly. Like, lore-wise and story-wise, like, as far as I can tell, there are humans and there are monsters. Sometimes they're friends, but they're usually fighting. And, like, how deep can we go on that? Like, this is not a rich world like Ravnica or Innistrad or Theros even, where coming back is worth our time.
I'm getting bored of the return to Zendikar, return to Ravnica every single year. They should move on. Like, honestly, I don't think they did enough with Dominaria, and I'm not really into Magic lore, but growing up and it being set in Dominaria, like, that's what I love. And, like, return to Zendikar every 2 years is, like, getting kind of boring.
Yeah, that being said, show me what the Phyrexians are doing again, because I'm into that.
Yeah, where are the Phyrexians? Where is Jin-Gitaxias? Where is Memnarch? What are they up to? Like, I want to know about them. I believe Yawgmoth is actually dead at this point, so their king is gone. I think the Eldrazi, Emrakul is accounted for. Ulamog and the other one, Kozilek, are on the loose, so they could come back. Nicol Bolas is in the prison realm, so the big bad from the last 20 years is currently on hiatus. Ugin is sitting there watching him, making sure he doesn't escape. So Ugin and Nicol Bolas are out of the storyline for a while. Hopefully we get some fresh faces in. Also, since we're on the lore, I know this side tangent, but I'm reading all of the original books, like from the first 5 years of Magic, and it was actually called Dominia at first, and became Dominaria sometime later. Just something I noticed when I was reading the books.
That's kind of cool. I was at a Leaving a Legacy event where one of the door prizes was some of the books, and I personally don't want to read them, but somebody won the Invasion block books, which is my favorite set because it's when I started. Like, Invasion's when I started, and I thought it was so cool. And they won these books and just did not care. And I was like, oh man, I would have loved to have won the Invasion block books. Like, that would have made my day.
So funny you mentioned that, because when I was on the stream with Phil, the chat was asking questions, and they knew I'm into the Magic books, and they're like, what's your favorite arc? And I was like, Invasion, because, like, Invasion is like the culmination of, like, they spent 10 years introducing you, like, in Tempest, like the Wrath Cycle. Like, you learned about Gerard Capation, and, like, you saw them find the Weatherlight and crew the Weatherlight. You got Captain Sisay and Squee and Karn and Krovax and all the members of the Weatherlight crew. And Invasion is when they team up with Urza and just slam the fuck into Yawgmoth, who's crawling out of the portal into Dominaria. And it's like the Endgame, the Avengers Endgame movie of the book series. It's really exciting, that particular 3-book arc.
I won't lie, that sounds kind of awesome.
Yeah, that's way cooler than I thought it was.
Yeah, it is.
All right, so it's probably about time to start talking about, like, each one of the companions individually. Given how much we've sort of, like, gone over our Lurrus points already, I'd like to make a motion to just, like, skip talking about Lurrus more and go straight on to Zerda, if that's okay with the two of you.
Can
we have a sub point about the price of Mishra's Bauble. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I have a $500 loan account that Card Hoarder gives me. And I also own a decent Magic Online collection. And this is one of 2 times in recent memory that I have had to borrow cards from someone in order to play a deck that I wanted. And that's crazy because Like, I borrowed 4 cards from Brian, like we already said, and it was like $400 worth of stuff.
Yeah, and like, this is an uncommon that's been reprinted kind of recently. Like, this isn't even like a card from Weatherlight a rare from Weatherlight or whatever. Like, this isn't Null Rod that's on the reserve list and like from Weatherlight. Like, this is an uncommon that's been reprinted kind of recently, and the original printing was with the modern card frame. Like, it's not even like ancient times that this card existed at all.
So I went to go buy some so I could play them in Vintage, and at the time they were 58 tickets each 2 days ago. I told myself I am not buying them, went to go buy Urza's Bauble because I'm playing a combo deck. The effect honestly doesn't really matter that much if I see the top card or a card in their hand. Even a set of Urza's Baubles were 29 tickets.
Wow. That's outrageous.
I paid the 29 tickets because I just wanted to play with Lurrus in Vintage. But it's crazy that that's where we're at now, where Baubles are this good. I have a friend who hasn't logged into Magic Online, this is not an exaggeration, in 3 years. He goes, I definitely have at least one set of Mishra's Bauble, maybe 2 if you want to log in. And we couldn't figure out his password, but he's like, yeah, if you sell them, just give me like 75%.
That's pretty dope. So, since we're talking about the Magic Online economy, I just want to point out the highway robbery that is Lurrus. So, Lurrus dropped like in the fake existence. Like, some people were lucky to get him at like 6 or 8 tickets or whatever, but like as soon as it was readily available, it was 25. At the same time, Gyruda, which is a multi-format 4 of, was 2 tickets. Lurrus is a 2-format 1 of, and it was 25. So, like, clearly there was some amount of collusion among the... Like, I mean, they were selling, I get it. Like, the price drops when they stop selling, and people were buying at 25, but, like, that was a serious hype buy for everyone who wanted to play Lurrus on the first 2 days of its existence. It's already down to 11, like, 6 days later at this point, and I think it's going to settle around, like, 5 or less. But I don't own a Lurrus yet, I'm not going to lie. I had plenty of other companions to play around with. I don't need to PTQ, I'm already queued, so, like, there's no sense of urgency. But, like, I'm waiting for the price collusion here to settle down a little bit. I got my playset of Zerdas for, like, 4 tickets. And I got, like, all the Gyrudas for 8 tickets. And, like, Yorion was, like, pocket change. And then this one Lurrus, just so hot. 25 tickets. That completely inflated. But I guess that's what happens when you need to own a card on release weekend.
So, Phil mentioned him earlier, Anthony Laverde, was watching Yamakiller stream where Yamakiller opened up 700 chests and he was the first person to have a Lurrus. Anthony paid Yamakiller 55 tickets to have one for the PTQ the next day. I am very lucky that Callum Whitefaces Smith also opened up a Lurrus. It was generous enough to sell it to me for 30 the same day. And I honestly feel like 30 for a Lurrus is... I'm very happy paying that so that I've had it for... how long has it been out? 2 weeks, and I've been able to test with it for 2 weeks. That was worth the 30 tickets to me.
Yeah, if you're 100% locked to play it, it's just absolutely, unarguably correct to be in your personal deck of choice. Like, I would have paid whatever it cost to get a Lurrus on day 0 also. How about that big sack Anurag opening a foil set of Ikoria out of a treasure chest on, like, the day that it was possible to do that? So he was just, like, already got every companion day 1.
I begged him for a Lurrus and he shot me down. Wow. So, yeah, Anurag, calling you out right now.
Salt.
It's okay. He already got kicked off this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh.
Fired. He definitely didn't leave to pursue other endeavors.
All right, so I guess we could talk about Zerda.
All right, so this is something that Brian and I have both had some degree of experience playing with. In my experience, it's very powerful. Well, maybe I should say the decks that it's in are very powerful, but Zerda itself is kind of narrow, and you often don't actually win with the Zerda. You win by just, like, jamming some 4-mana Planeswalker down your opponent's throat on turn 1 because you have 2 Monoliths in your hand, or, like, Monolith and Key. And, like, that gets the job done before you even actually have to cast the Zerda. and the Zerda becomes this backup plan.
Yeah, the league I recorded with it was like very early before anyone had really tuned or fleshed out the tech, and the list was kind of bad. Like it went all in on trying to combo. Like there was the 4 Grim monolith plus 3 Basalt monolith plus another Basalt monolith in the board to wish for with Karn, and the sideboard had no counterplay at all. Like it was just more ways to combo. So like I lost to just like I lost a lot of games where just like Disenchant would have done it, and the sideboard didn't even have a Tormod script in it to wish for with Karn. Like it was just like a really messy early list. So all of my experience so far is through that unfortunate lens, but definitely the ability of that deck to generate 4 mana and then infinite mana is not to be understated. Like it's really explosive.
So 2 things that I found personally is, 1, Zerda is not the easiest card to cast in this deck.
Oh god, that's so true.
Yeah, like I've won a couple games just because my opponent only has colorless mana, and by the time they can cast Zerda, I've finally found my Chain of Vapor Dance or Karn or something along those lines. And the second thing I wanted to mention was, there's games where you're holding open Abrupt Decay, and, or at least from my perspective here, but Abrupt Decay does nothing to the infinite mana combo once Zerda's in play. If there's 2 monoliths, you can try to Abrupt Decay the Zerda or a monolith, but they're just going to make infinite mana in response. So I feel like some people play a little too cautiously against this Zerda deck, and they should be more aggro or, whatever. But it's really hard to disrupt them once they've have their permanents on the table. Yeah, that's not how you want to beat the Zerda Bomberman deck.
Yeah, that's one of the lessons I got in the league I played with it, where just like sequencing your mana so that once Zerda's in play, you can make infinite through a disruption piece. So like, there was the first game I played, I just didn't play a Lotus Petal that was in my hand. I just forgot to do it before I cast my Zerda, and I lost because of it. Like having one more
I watched
mana
that was rough.
Yeah, to untap the monolith in response to the plow on my Zerda. Like, I had one floating because that's how Grim Monolith works with Zerda, and just didn't have the second one to go off again in response. And that's just like one of those things you do once. But keep in mind, like Bryant said, on both sides of the table, like, a Swords to Plowshares does not break up that combo unless they're all the way tapped out to do it.
So another thing that I found about the Zerda deck, and like I should probably pause for a second to say there's really 2 different Zerda decks. The first is a traditional Zerda Bomberman hybrid, and the second is just like Zerda Infinite Mana Turbo Karnforge. And I think the latter is probably the better of the 2 deck lists.
I would agree.
But I've tried both,
for sure.
And my experience is that, my god, that deck mulligans a lot. Like, it mulligans so much because Grim Monolith is so important to your turbo openers that Serum Powder is, non-ironically, probably, like, good and the real deal in that deck, which is crazy.
One thing that I love about the Zerda deck is that at this point, people have gone so deep into finding what they need. They found a recent standard uncommon in Glass Casket, and this is a terrific card in the board. Like, I love that they're playing Glass Casket. Like, it is so cool. I don't know, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. So the other thing that I've experienced in playing this deck is it cannot beat a Null Rod. Like, once a Null Rod is in play, the number of outs that you have to it is essentially 0, because you technically have these Seal of Cleansings, but most of your white sources are artifacts between your Ancient Dens and your Petals and your Opals, so it's actually incredibly hard to get single white if there is a Null Rod in play. And that sounds ridiculous, but it's really the truth with how this monocolored mana base is constructed.
Yeah, I've been playing a lot recently, and the amount of Null Rods running around right now is just unreal. I faced Eco Baron in the finals of a prelim last week, playing the Yorion deck. They had 4 Null Rods, and I've had to readapt my board plans entirely to the point where, like, I'm boarding out artifacts now just because I'm expecting everyone to have at least 2 Null Rod in this current metagame.
Yeah, the Yorion list I brewed up today, I had 2 Null Rods and a Collector Roof in the sideboard, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to add 2 Stony Silence as well when I move forward. The sideboard was kind of a mess. I threw it together 2 minutes before I recorded, but like now that I have a better feel, I think I want at least 4, maybe 5 null rods in this format.
Yeah.
Which is kind of insane, but I'm into it.
I don't like either of you right now.
Oh, I've been singing the null rod praises really high. I had someone send me a donation deck list for Loam, and I'm like, yeah, okay, but how about we put 2 green suns into the main deck so that we could play Collector Oof main? Oh, you're playing Eldrazi? Well, what would you say about 3 or 4 null rods in the board? Like, I've been doing that sort of thing to every deck list that I've been playing.
Yeah, earlier today when I was brewing up this Yorion list, at one point in my brewing, it was a Green Sun Zenith deck. And then I realized that I don't like the Green Sun Zenith deck when it's 60 cards, so I'm definitely not going to have any fun when it's 80. And I just went back to... I cut all that, but definitely having access to a tutorable main deck null rod right now is bananas.
All right. So since you mentioned Yorion, why don't we go there next?
Yes, please. Oh my god. Yorion. So this... I think that Yorion might be the sweet spot of, like, competitive without being busted companion. Because, like, he seems to be, like, right in that midsection of, like, nobody's complaining that he's busted, but he's definitely seeing play. And either it is not busted, it's just, like, the Durdle player's dream. Like, Durdle, trade 1 for 1, draw 5. I like that play pattern. I like it a lot. Sign me up for that. The other alternative is that it's horrendously busted, and a 4/5 Muldrifter, just guaranteed to be in your opening hand for when you're ready for it, Muldrifter Plus, is just secretly the best companion. So we'll see where this lands, but I am really, really in love with Yorion and the games that result in Yorion being your companion. I've played Yorion in Pioneer and Legacy now. I've seen him floating around in Modern. I can't wait to try that, but really into it.
So, 2 things. 1, why are we assuming Yorion's gender? And the real talking point was, like, if you told me a year ago that people would be competitively playing 80-card decks, I probably wouldn't have believed you and made some sort of, like, have fun playing EDH joke. But Yorion, I love the constraints around playing it. It just seems, like Brian said, the perfect sweet spot of, like, companion and cost. Like, if every companion here on out was on a similar power level, I don't think anyone would complain.
Yeah, I think the Yorion deck building is really interesting. So, like, I'm primarily a prison player, right? And so I'm presenting my opponent with a question, and the question is always the same: can you deal with this right now? And when you're playing these 80-card Yorion decks, you're less likely to have the exact answer you need in your opener. So, like, say you're playing something like Red Prison, and you're going turn 1, Chalice or Blood Moon or something like that that's going to be pretty annoying. And when you're on the draw, your answer there is, like, Force of Will or Force of Negation. And so you're less likely to have the exact cards that you need, and you have to do the best that you can to build in redundancy in order to make up for that. And it's led to some really creative deck building, such as Abundant Growth seeing play in Legacy in a non-Enchantress deck.
Yeah, Legacy All-Star Abundant Growth. Like, it is a worse Magic card than Arkham's Astrolabe by, like, a functional degree, but it's pretty close. Like, it is the second best Arkham's Astrolabe you can play in a Blink deck, and I was impressed with the Yorion deck I played today. The ability to function without an Astrolabe or Abundant Growth in the opener was, like, I feared the worst. I was like, well, we got 8 of these. We doubled the number of Astrolabes and only increased the deck size by 20. So the math should work out favorably, but there were plenty of times where I just didn't have a way to filter my mana. And you were still just, like, casting Swords to Plowshares and Snapcaster and Oko and Abrupt Decay, and you're still just a sweet deck, and it just happens to go off when you can actually cast all your spells.
It's probably too long to, like, talk about here as a bit, but I think, like, Cantrip Theory is really interesting with these 80-card Yorion decks. Like, because of, like, the percentage of your deck that you're looking at is different. So, like, when you're pondering and you have 40 cards remaining in your deck, and you're looking for something specific, that's very different than when you have, 67 cards left in your deck and you're pondering. So I think there's probably some cool design space and theory space to explore there.
I promise not to go too deep, but when I was building my list, I decided to go Brainstorm Ponder, and then just that's it. Like I have those are the card selection blue 1 cantrip spells. Like I didn't do a Portent or Preordain. I had the 4 Astrolabes and Abundant Growths. Then I had all 8 Strixes in the deck. So like I had lots of cantrips, but I decided to just max out on cards that make a thud when they hit the battlefield, or cards that cantrip more organically while producing material, like the Strixes. And the Yorion Mirror I played in the last round, their deck was full of Preordains, and they Mystic Sanctuaried up a Preordain 3 times, which is just... That did not seem powerful at the time, and it was always just like bottom, draw, go. And it's like, instead of trying to... Like, by adding 20 cards to our deck, we've decreased our ability to make selections, so let's just fill it with good cards. Like, that's what I did anyway. We'll see how this bears out over time, but it is really exciting to think about.
One of these initial lists was sent to me, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, yeah, all these cards are good, and then I glossed over the 2-mana slot, where I saw 3 copies of Predict, and my eyes jumped out of my head. And I know that this person loves Predict, but I couldn't help but think, like, you're playing an 80-card deck. What are you doing? And I was like, you need to cut that card. Like, your percentage of hitting blind is so low with 80 cards. Like, I understand you're playing 12 cantrips or 16 cantrips or whatever you're doing now, but, like, Predict has to go. And I think part of that's, like, what might have helped. Like, I don't know the backstory. So, Rugved is the person that created the Luricles list, the Miracles with Luris. That's gone back to a more traditional shell with like Portent. And I think part of that is people want to play cards like Portent and Predict and like these cantrips that feel more classic.
Predict is sweet with baubles.
Yeah. And so is Terminus. Like bauble triggering Terminus is really cool.
Yeah. So I think it's really early to like see where Miracles is going, because I've seen non-companion Miracles, I've seen Yorion Miracles, I've seen Luris Miracles, I've seen like a traditional counterbalance shell, I've seen all sorts of crazy things as far as like Miracles specifically goes. Lots of differences in like various 5.0 deck lists that I'm seeing across the Twitterverse.
Yeah, and then Caracas. Like, Caracas is a phenomenal card in Legacy right now in general, because most people have a legend that they're just going to cast. But in the Yorion deck, like, it becomes an engine. Like, unbeatable, just like chugga, 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 you're dead. I think that Yorion is the only one that really goes off with your own Caracas. Like, you're not going to Caracas your own Zerta or Luris unless you're saving it from removal. But multiple times playing Yorion today, I was just like, please let's draw Caracas. Please draw Caracas. And it's also some insulation. Like, if they Caracas your Yorion to save 4 life, you just drew 3. So it's a good deal.
Yeah, Caracas
so back when Wishclaw was printed, I was looking at Caracas and TES as a way to bounce Thalia. So you activate Wishclaw, you get Caracas, and you bounce Thalia, and it only costs you 1 mana and a land drop. So I had bought a second foil Japanese foil Caracas. I might have said that wrong. But I was so pumped about it. And now that Luris was out, I was like, oh man, maybe now is actually the time to play Caracas and TES. It's still not. You can't afford a colorless land in your already 4-color deck. I want to play it so badly too, just because it seems really cool.
But it casts your Luris!
I definitely remember one time, this is ancient times, I was playing Elves back when it was a white deck, before we had Craterhoof Behemoth. We had to win with Mirror Entity. And I had Thalia and Gaddock Teague in play against a Storm deck, and I felt like $1,000,000, and they were just like, Caracas, go. And I was like, oh no. And I couldn't win that turn. And then they were like, end step, bounce Teague, untap, bounce Thalia, you're dead. It's just like, damn it.
What's their username? It's the Ant player that has AD in their name.
42 AD.
42 AD. All right, as an aside,
Martin Vanasek.
The number of times that I have been in unlosable positions against a stock deck list, and then they have had just like the absolute craziest tech to beat me, I can't count.
So I like how you are 100% wrong here, Phil. Martin plays the wildest lists. And I got to watch Martin play against a friend of mine, Devin Riley, who is ex-Grave on Moto. At I want to say it was Niagara Falls. They were playing in one of the last chance qualifiers, and Devin's position looked unlosable. And all of a sudden, Martin drew Praetor's Grasp off the top in his Atlas, stole Devin's Jace, and then played Jace and won the game with the Jace. Martin is a madman who will play anything if it's going to give him a small edge. He also plays like 2 copies of Pernicious Deed in his Atlas.
Yeah, that's it. That's it right there. That's what gets me.
So Martin's a master. He also plays a 62-card main deck with 2 main deck Abrupt Decays. Martin's a legend.
This sounds a lot like testing and tuning with Rich Shea. He is not afraid to put any card in any deck as long as it's blue so it can pitch to Force of Will, which leads to one of our favorite inside jokes here in Pittsburgh Magic, where Rich was in the top 4 of a Star City Legacy Open with Bug Delver, and he had 1 Demir Charm in the deck. And that was just his, it seems fine and it's blue card for the day. And on camera, Cedric and Patrick Sullivan were going through the list, and they were like, yep, Tarmogoyf, that's a good one. Delver's Secrets, of course. Demir Charm, just the one. And then Patrick Sullivan goes, yep, you don't want to draw 2 of those. So it is now just a Pittsburgh Magic meme to say, wouldn't want to draw 2 of those whenever you see a terrible card in someone's deck.
I love that.
All right, we have a chance to finish this under 2 hours. Let's talk about Gyruda. So I tried the, as soon as Gyruda was no longer bugged on Magic Online, which is funny because it was bugged to be worse than it is. Like, the card is better now that they fixed the bug, which is very strange and kind of obnoxious. Like, emergency ban, day 0, because it's not good enough. So, the bug, if you didn't know, was Gyruda doesn't care about Rest in Peace or Leyline. Gyruda mills 4 from each player, and then you can put an even cost creature from among those cards, those 8 cards, into play. It doesn't say from the graveyard. It doesn't specify anything other than an even cost creature from among these cards. So as long as Gyruda can still see the card wherever it is, if it goes into exile face up, it can still choose it. So, and Gyruda's trigger resolves all at once. It's mill 4, put a creature into play. There's no space in between. So there is no, you can't crypt, you can't Nile Spellbomb in response. That doesn't do anything. You can't Leyline, you can't Rest in Peace. You have to have Grafdigger's Cage or Containment Priest, basically, to slow this down at all. So that's really interesting. That said, I tried the balls to the wall Belcher version of this deck, and it's real bad. It's so bad. It's like Belcher. You're still going to lose to a Force of Will, but unlike Belcher, it also loses to a removal spell, like Swords to Plowshares or Caracas, especially Caracas. That one was a nightmare. Every time my opponent was, I would reveal Gyruda as my companion, and they'd be like, Caracas, go. And I just could never win. So those were the early builds. Much like the Zerta build I tried, that was just like push the combo to the max. That was the Gyruda build I tried also. I believe that some of you guys have seen or tried some of the more iterated versions at this point that play like some other stuff. Tell us about those.
So I originally saw this through PVDH, and I think Aurum has been playing it as well. There's another version that is less combo intensive and has sort of a hybrid reanimator or cast some stuff plan that is playing things like Grizzlebrand, Thought-Knot Seer, Unmask. It has a Burning Wish package in there as well, I believe, so that it has some degree of interaction. You're less likely to kill your opponent when you combo off. Instead, you're more likely to get, like, I have a 6/6, and I unmasked you, and I played Thought-Knot Seer. Or, I have a 6/6, I flip Grizzlebrand into play, I've drawn 7, I'm ready to try again next turn. So it's less of a combo deck than more of kind of a double reanimator deck, in that you get Gyruda plus something else dumb, which the second thing usually isn't legendary, so you don't just fold to Caracas. Or if it is legendary, it's something like Grizzlebrand, where you're fine if your opponent bounces it. The deck looks cool. I haven't actually gotten to play that yet, but I want to.
I can tell you from on the looks cool axis, that video got more views than any video I've posted in a long time. People just love the busted stuff. I think the last video that got as many views as this one did as quickly was the breach deck. So people love watching busted combo try to go off. I'm sad to have disappointed them so heavily.
So one thing that I've found is I actually haven't faced the reanimator builds that Phil is describing. I've only ever faced the Belcher variants. But, I mean, my sample size is still pretty small, but I'm 4-1, and it's not because TES is so good at beating the deck that's trying to turn one you that has Chalice of the Void and Mindbreak Trap in it. It's because when this deck goes off, they're often playing Lion's Eye Diamond and discarding their hand, which means discarding their Mindbreak Trap. And then imagine if you're facing Belcher, but when the Belcher deck goes off, they often reveal Taiga 4 cards down, because that's what this Belcher's Gyruda deck does. I've won so many games where my opponents milled 20 cards, put 20 power into play, and passed the turn. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll flashback Echo Vans now and kill you, or whatever I'm going to do. It just seems weird to play a deck that loses to Swords to Plowshares, Chain of Vapor, Pyroblast, Karakas, like so many cards. I don't think this deck is the real deal. I think eventually it will fade into oblivion. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But there's plenty of like tier 3 Belcher-esque decks out there. This is, like, in my opinion, on the same power level as, like, Oops All Spells.
I think at the very least, this is going to be the sort of deck where, like, you will definitely still see it on Magic Online, where people are just like, I want to jam a league. I have 45 minutes. Let's go. Like, this deck checks those sorts of boxes.
So on that note, I gotta say, those people are going to be really disappointed, because unlike Belcher, this goes to both of your points. Belcher, when it pops, the game is over. I mean, there's some chance sometimes that, like, the Taiga's in the top 10 cards and they don't take 20. Like, okay. But usually when it pops, it pops. But I played a lot of games in the league. The video's on my YouTube. You can check it out. Like, the interplay is high. Like Bryant said, like, sometimes you just, like, make Gyruda, you copy it with Spark Double, and then you whiff and you pass the turn with 12 power in play. And you end up in this, like, dance of, like, can they answer 2 6/6s on turn 2 before they die from 20? And I had a lot of really interesting back and forth, like, combat heavy games, which surprised me a lot.
Yeah, I watched most of that video, and I didn't realize how much of a difference there were between the clones until I watched your video. That was really useful in that regard.
It's crazy how the clones stack up each other clone's ability as they go. So, like, your first priority should be hitting Spark Double, which is the one that becomes a non-legendary, so you can grow Gyrudas instead of just rebuying Gyrudas. And then, like, if you copy a Spark Double with Dax Duplicate, now you have a non-legendary Gyruda with Haste and Dethrone. If you copy that with another Dax Duplicate, it has 2 instances of Dethrone. And, like, it just, like, goes deep, and it's really crazy from there. So I had a lot of fun goofing around with the clones, figuring out what the right sequence of copies was.
All right. Are we on to the everything else category now, or do we have more to say about Gyruda?
No, I'm done.
Yeah, that's bad.
All right. So, based on my experience so far, there is a huge power level gap between the companions that we've already mentioned and all of the others that exist. Does that agree with what you all have experienced?
So
Yes.
I've seen, I don't know how to say this, Jingartha. I've seen that out of lands a couple times. But it's awkward because post-board they often can't use it because of the ley line of the void, so they can't reveal their companion.
Yeah, I know Kellen Pistori was trying Jengartha in lands, because it is free in the main deck, but it is just worse than a sideboard slot, it turns out. Like, this random 5/5 in the format where everyone has Karakas, like, just isn't that good.
I am looking forward to trying it in Modern Storm, to be honest, though. I don't know if it's worth the sideboard slot, but it seems cool to just have, like, a backup plan as a 5/5 that doesn't lose to Graveyard Hate, where you can also tap it on your next turn and make mana for casting Gifts and Given.
Yeah, it would be pretty sweet to just, like, ritual Jengartha, turn 2, go. Like, good luck, idiot. Like, then they cast, like, Damping Sphere and pass back, and then you just beat them 5 times, or 4 times for 5. That would be pretty sweet. I'm into that. Let me know what that happens. I want to hear about it.
So, despite the fact that like all of these other companions are like noticeably worse than the others, the mechanic itself is still extremely powerful. So you should still expect to see the others around. So someone donated for me to play a cat stompy deck with Kahira, and I've seen like a Kahira good stuff pile with like questing beasts and Quizali pride mages, and someone else saw elementals, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Joseph Dyer of Allwrath XP. He's the legacy writer over on Hipsters of the Coast. I'm pretty sure he posted a screenshot with like a Kahira revealed as his companion, and he had a Chrome Mox with Risen Reef under it and 2 caverns in play. And I was like, oh baby, tell me more about this.
So before Joseph Dyer complains, he actually writes for MTG Goldfish.
Oh, does he? Did he move over?
I believe so.
Okay, my bad.
He took
Sorry,
over
Joseph.
the This Week in Legacy column.
Okay, cool. All right, so Obosh, have we seen Obosh?
I have not.
Like, so the thing about Obosh is that he's kind of out, or the creature is kind of outrageously powerful. Like, I've drafted Obosh a number of times, and when it comes into play and then you go to your attack phase, your opponent's usually either dead or plague-winded. But in Legacy, 5 mana out of any sort of deck that would want this effect is a big ask, especially facing down Caracas. Because, like, the source has to connect with Obosh still in play. Even if you somehow get to 6 mana in your burn deck and you're like, Obosh, bolt you. It's like, bounce it. I take 3 like normal. I can't imagine Burn can't find a better way to spend 5 mana than Obosh.
I think Burn should be all in on main deck Pyrostatic Pillars right now, personally. Like, with everyone, like, cantripping, playing bobbles, playing hyper efficiently, just punish them.
Phil, what do you have against me? First, you're telling everyone to play 4 Null Rods, and now you're telling them to play main deck Pillars? Did I upset you?
Play them both.
I am a hateful man. I do one thing.
I can see that.
So one thing that's
off.
Something that's happening in Pioneer and Modern is that the burn decks are just playing Luris. Because Legacy, you got Fire Blast and Flame Rift, so you can stay mono red, but in Modern, you need Boros Charm and Lightning Helix. Pioneer, same story. So it's pretty easy to adopt Luris since they're already a white deck. So I guess we'll see if Legacy Burn tilts white to want Luris or not. But their spells are so much better than the creatures comparatively to the smaller formats that it might just not be necessary.
So moving on to Lutri, I want to share a story from this past weekend. I'm playing in the Vintage Challenge. My opponent, Game 1, reveals Luris. It appears they're on PO. I win Game 1. We go on to Game 2. They reveal Lutri.
Yes.
And I'm like, what is happening? I get demolished by, like, they misdirect my recall to them. They force back. I'm like, oh my god, I don't know what's happening anymore. They took my recall, whatever. So I very much lose that game. And then Game 3, they reveal no companion and tinker into Bolas's Citadel and wreck me. I'm just like, I don't know what this is anymore. Like, I have no idea what's going on.
So that ties back to that Elves sideboard of, like, do you bring Luris in? Do you bring your monsters out? How do you play this Luris? Like, is it a card in your deck? Is it a companion? And I am so excited to hear that this happened in Constructed because, like I said, I've been drafting a lot, and, like, I'll have an opponent, like, reveal Yorion and then just, like, on turn 5 cast Obosh out of their deck. I'm like, oh shit. All right, that's a thing you can do. There's nothing wrong with that. But, like, I'm so glad it happened and Constructed to someone.
I don't know, it just like there's a lot of cool counter gameplay to companions that, like, people don't discuss, and, like, people are out there expanding and, like, trying to figure out, like, what are the limitations of these companions, and I love that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Eli Cassis also brewed a list for Modern that just had, like, 4 Luris in the main deck. No companion. I just want to play this card. Just a souped up Eternal Witness type role player. So that's a thing you can do too.
Yeah, we haven't seen the 4X Luris main deck yet, but I wouldn't see that as absolutely crazy either.
Yeah, so, like, basically the conditions for that to be good, For one, I don't think 4 is the right number of Lurrus anyway, because it is a legendary creature, and getting redundant is bad with legends in a format like Legacy where every card matters. But playing like 2 or 3 Lurrus as part of a package, that might even be in like an Obosh or Yorion deck. Like when we start to layer the companions as just cards in your deck with a different companion outside your deck, it's going to get really interesting. So I think the last one we need to talk about is Umori. So Phil, when are you building Umori Enchantress? When's that happening?
I'm not going to lie to you. I don't even know what that companion is.
All right, so it's the Golgari one. It's Golgari 2, 4 total. It's a 4/5. The deck building restriction is all of your non-land cards have to share a card type. And the payoff is cards of a chosen type cost 1 less while Umori is in play.
You lose Destiny Spinner and Enchantress. Like,
right.
Ugh.
It's a good time to be an enchantment creature. So
right. So you just lose Enchantress.
So
I guess you don't lose Spinner.
You get to keep Spinner, you lose Enchantress, and you lose Green Sun Zenith. I don't know. So basically, I racked my brain with, is there any non-creature card type that can win a game on its own with no support from other card types? And I tried to think of like some kind of like Burning Wish pile where like, what if Burning Wish costs 1 less? Could we break it out of the sideboard? But like all the rituals are instants. Rite of Flame isn't though. Bryant, ban it. So there, I don't know. I tried to figure out like what artifact you can win with. Like Walking Ballista exists, but like you don't have like Karn or Zerda to pay off. I don't know. It's really hard. It's a really interesting puzzle. If anyone breaks Umori, I will give you a personal shout out on this podcast.
I did get
I can't figure it out.
I did get a donation for a Kairuga the Macro Sage deck. Somebody trying out an Eldrazi deck that features that. We'll see how that goes. It's going to be weird.
That's going to be sweet.
I have 8 Spirit Guides. Let's go.
I hope you draw a card off a Spirit Guide at some point in the league. That's the challenge I'm extending to you. Unlock the achievement.
All right. We'll see. I threw a couple Crystalline Giants into the deck list as well because, like, I'm sad that I haven't played that card yet.
Oh, I got to draft one of those the other day, and it's as dumb as you could imagine in that format.
All right. So for some closing thoughts, we have kind of a sweet graph. Brian, I know you've already engaged with this a bit, so do you want to talk about it?
Yes. Let me open the link real quick so I can give proper credit. So this is Anael Yal at YAHIANAEL on Twitter. They posted a graph of all of the companions. It's not a graph, it's a spreadsheet, excuse me. But a spreadsheet of all of the companions and their performance in every format over the last 3 to 5 events, however many premier events have fired on Magic Online. And it's really cool to see, like, the distribution. Basically, Lurrus, you see, got a lot of play in Standard the first week, then fell down to just 3 copies from 8 over the course of 4 events. But then it goes up in Pioneer, up. And then Modern, it goes even higher. Then in Legacy, even higher. And then in Vintage, even higher. And it's just like, the number gets bigger over time and as the format gets larger. And Lurrus is the only one with just like a straight full column of play. Like Lutri has only really made it into Vintage. Karuga has only been in Standard. There's a couple other like blips here and there. Apparently someone did well with Umori in Standard. I'm surprised to see that got played at all. But I guess if you're going to win with nothing but creatures, Standard is the place to do it. So it is pretty interesting. It highlights more the card pool than anything else, really, once you look at this, like what card pools are capable of and what gets broken as you go deeper into the formats. But it is just really cool if you enjoy visual representation of data.
Yeah, so for those of you who are just listening and you don't have access to this graph, just to give you an idea of the range here, in Standard, Lurrus was about 20% of the format. Whereas in Legacy and Vintage, it was 47% in Legacy and about 48% in Legacy and about 49% in Vintage. Whereas all of the other companions in various formats. Like the highest we're seeing them at is about 7% aggregate across formats, whereas Lurrus across formats is about 37%. So Lurrus, if you bet on that horse cat nightmare for that weekend, you came out ahead.
So it's worth noting 37%. That's very similar to the percentages that Oko is seeing play at. Except Lurrus is seeing play across multiple archetypes.
Yeah, so specific to Legacy, Lurrus is at about 48%, which would be eclipsing Oko by, 10%. So that's kind of, I guess, our closing thought for today. We all have largely liked gameplay, but it is clear that Lurrus is definitely a great thing to be doing in this format, at least this early on. Do you all have any other closing thoughts or things that we should have on our radars as Legacy players?
I just want to go back to the keeping an open mind thing. I'm not sure that companions are here to stay, but give them a real test. Play them, form real opinions, not just I played a league and they're bad. But also, we didn't do it when we opened, so I'm going to do it now. Special thanks to our editor, Phil Blackman. You can find him at Force of Phil on Twitter. He's a host of Eternal Durdles podcast, his own podcast, and we appreciate what he does.
All right, folks. Have a great rest of the day. Keep on slamming some companions into other companions until they band, or you get bored, or you discover the next broken deck.